Hello.
Hi, David.
Hello, lovely to see you, Nicolette.
Thank you. It's been a long time. How are you?
Very, 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 very well. Full of lots of bubbling things happening in life and just in good form. I hope you are too. And I hope all our common friends are in good form. I shall now stop talking because I wanted just to check my microphone was working, and it looks like it is.
It is. Can hear you loud and clear. I think we've got Neil here as well, who just wanted to ask a few queries just to make sure that you're fully comfortable with everything before kicking off. So, Neil?
Yeah, David, thank you. Great to see you again. Just to check that you're completely comfortable with the process in terms of the Google Doc. Obviously, it's the same as last time around that we did this similar session.
Yeah, I probably need to check where the link to the Google Doc is, but
I'll post that in the chat.
Oh, thank you. And hello to Fami. It's nice to see you.
Hi, David. Great to see you.
Yes, hello.
I was asked by my colleague Mark van Umeren to say hello, who is sending you his regards.
Thank you. Great affection. I have lots of affection for Mark, and thank him for his leadership always.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the Google Doc. Okay, Nicolette, I'm here with Florence, and I'm here with Noemi. We are.
Oh, hello to both.
Yeah. We're not in front of the camera, but we are listening or half listening anyway. Yeah. Right.
As the last time, David, as you ask the questions, I'll delete them off the top. So the one at the top will be the one to ask. And then when it gets to approximately 1:13, I will shuffle up the final question to the top of that. And then Justine, we're working with myself to put together the kind of headline take-home messages. And then once that final question's been asked, we'll shuffle that to the top of the Google Doc as well. So
good. Okay, so you'll manage the Google Doc and you'll use the Google Doc to stimulate me to say the right things. That's great. Now I see the panelists have changed, which is understandable. I actually know Jennifer Uchendu a bit. We've met and worked together, so it's really nice. And everybody on the panel knows that they're not giving speeches, which is good. So we'll do it through the connections. Yup.
Just say I'm going to leave this call now, so I'll be on the Gigabox, but I shall be online for the next hour and a half and available on WhatsApp if you've got anything that I can help with.
Understood.
Good luck, everyone. See you soon. Bye.
Thank you, as always.
Great. And I think Gary's going to be joining a bit later on. I think it's quite early in the States. I think it's 6:30 in the morning.
Nicola, any messages? Either use the group if you like on WhatsApp or direct messaging if you feel like it, or in the chat. But I shall probably use my phone more than I shall use the chat.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Beautiful. So good to see you. Really. We thought our food work would all be finished, but it's not. It's actually picked up even stronger. And that's, I think, because it's proved to be quite a profound process, and it's linking into much of COP26. I was just on a meeting of the champions and others on where we are on COP26 and what the follow-up is going to be. And it's going to have to be connecting together all these agendas, food, climate, health, nature, and making it relevant to people, localities, nations, rather than doing it all at the stratosphere, because the stratosphere has sort of lost resonance with all the difficulties that politicians are having. Good.
And I caught up with Catherine last week, which is great.
Oh, you did. I'm very, very pleased. She might actually join us today. I'm so glad that you connected with her, and that's really, really good. I'm not doing huge amounts of travel to the UK. I did go and try to go and see my family, who I haven't seen for a long time. It's quite challenging combination of Brexit and people muttering that I've only got 8 months left on my passport, and that's not good. And then all this COVID-y stuff is quite tricky. I hope you're getting some peace and joy.
We'll do. It's just extremely busy. It just seems to be busier than ever, which is good, but there's lots going on. But even just in terms of the more logistic side of it, in terms of the challenges of returning to work and restricted capacity and so on, and dealing with lots of comments and complaints, but it's fine.
Welcome everyone attending in the room, joining me here in Glasgow and virtually. I'm really delighted to be here to raise awareness of the vital and often underappreciated interconnections between climate change and mental health. I'm Dr. Emma Lawrence, one of your co-hosts and lead of Climate Cares, the program of work trying to both understand and respond to these interactions between climate change and mental health, run by the Institute of Global Health Innovation and the Grantham Institute of Climate and the Environment at Imperial College London. My background is in neuroscience, chemistry and physics, science communication, and working with youth mental health charities. It's a real pleasure to now welcome my co-host and chair of the panel discussion section of today's event, the esteemed Professor David Nabarro. And David, who's joining us virtually, if you can please unmute and introduce yourself.
So good day, everybody. And thank you, Emma, for that lovely introduction. You're the esteemed Emma Lawrence, and I am delighted to be here supporting this vital event that is only happening because of the leadership that you and the many colleagues with which you are working have shown in bringing this issue forward and making certain that we can have, as you say, an informed conversation about climate change and mental health. So I'm David Nabarro, and I'm working on a variety of issues on COVID-19 with the World Health Organization, on food systems with the United Nations, on the future of systems leadership in my own outfit, 4SD. But most importantly, I'm very pleased to be here as co-director of the Institute for Global Health Innovation. We are going to take forward this issue of climate change and health as an area of concentration, but very much seeking to support others as they explore the significance and relevance of these connections. Back to Emma, who's now going to describe the work that she's been doing and also introduce us to this really exciting event.
Thank you so much, David. And as David said, we're drawing today not only on our own work, but the voices of many others working in this space. And we also want to hear from you, as well as you hearing from us. So we want this to be an opportunity in the midst of what is an exceptionally busy time. And I know for those joining me in the room, Glasgow is a very hectic space. Those listening around the world has been processing what's been happening. So we just want to take a moment to come into this event. And to do this, we're going to use Mentimeter, which you can access from your device, whatever you're using. Go to menti.com and type in the room code 76351028 when prompted. So it might be considered a little bit unusual for an academically organized event to do a gratitude exercise, but we know for our own mental health and for working together to cope with and respond to the climate crisis, we need radical reconnection. We need an opportunity to connect to ourselves, to others, and to these broader challenges. So in the powerful words of Elizabeth Watusi, we want to open our hearts. And research shows that gratitude can be important for allowing us to explore and sit with these very difficult conversations. So if you can go into the Menti We're going to just ask you to connect with others in this space, introduce yourself, perhaps what you're working on, and also share something. It can be big, it can be small, someone you've met at COP, the fact that your dog's next to you in the room, anything that just allows you to just take a moment and join us in this event. So we've got some answers coming in. Grateful for being at COP. Thank you very much. If you're willing to, it'd be great to also hear who's sharing these. So if you can also introduce yourself along with your thoughts. I know I'm really grateful also for the opportunity to be here. I know this is one of the first events at COP, or this is the first COP where mental health and emotional well-being has been a topic of official COP program events, including this one. Jess from IGHI, grateful to be meeting so many colleagues in real life. I'm Caroline in the room in Glasgow, and it's nice to do some human connecting in real life today. As a PhD student at Imperial studying climate change and extinctions, I'm grateful for this event. Tassia from Australia, grateful to be able to join virtually tonight. Thank you, Tassia, coming in the Australian evening. Okay, so thank you so much, and please keep answering, and other people can see in the Menti as we keep moving on. Abdullah, great to learn more about mental health and climate change. David Nabarro, grateful to be able to connect with so many others. Neha in India, being able to participate in creating change for the planet. So it's really great to see everyone joining us, really diverse places around the world. So if we go back to the slides, please continue to share and you continue to read from other people, but I'll just go through the agenda for today. So the first part of this presentation is to really showcase the evidence to date about the connections between climate change and mental health, both directly and indirectly, and also hear stories from around the world. And then we'll have an activity to start to think about how we're actually feeling in response to this enormous challenge that we face, what we're thinking and feeling both on the ground at COP and around the world, and open our hearts in order to be able to, as Obama said yesterday, channel these emotions into action, how we can cope with and respond to. So we're then going to look at how we can become active participants in creating the future we hope to see, and start to use the power of human imagination, creativity, and connection to see with new eyes. And finally, we'll have a panel discussion. So I'm really thrilled we're going to be joined by an amazing group of panelists that Professor David Nabarro will introduce when we come to that section. They're already listening in on Zoom and joining me in the room before we have a final activity to share and reflect on what we're learning and what we'd like to see moving forward from today. And basically, to sum up what we're trying to do, it's no small thing. We're trying to open up a discussion to reflect on this vital challenge from Christiana Figueres and Tom Rivett-Carnick. How we achieve well-being for everyone, everywhere on a thriving planet will be the most poignant chapter of the story of our species. And as we outline now the evidence of how climate change does impact and is impacting our mental health and emotional well-being, we know that as many of the things that we're hearing, the frustration about inaction, these are difficult things to sit with and hold. We know it's uncomfortable and we know it's important to listen, but if it becomes too overwhelming at any point, just know that there are people available, we have people on call, and we have amazing support services, both in the UK and globally, and we've provided links in the chat. So when you talk about climate change and mental health, as we're having some discussions on the ground in COP, at first, people might not put two and two together. We know that climate change is probably, or is the biggest threat and challenge humanity currently faces. But simultaneously, mental health and emotional well-being has also been a rising crisis. And we know there's no country in the world where the mental health needs of the population are met with appropriate treatment and support and prevention. But what a lot of people don't see is how these two things actually really closely fit together. And so climate change is not only a physical health emergency, but a mental health emergency. And climate change directly and indirectly impacts mental health outcomes in ways that I'll describe. And these are currently hidden costs, but they're really significant and unaccounted for. Next slide. So we know rising greenhouse gases. Unfortunately, we're seeing rising temperatures. We are and will see rising sea levels. And we're also seeing more acute and chronic extreme weather and extreme climate events. We're already seeing fires, floods, and more frequent and severe droughts. So what does this have to do with mental health? Well, we know that if you directly experience any of these events, whether you directly experience high temperatures, whether you lose your home in a flood or a fire, this impacts us in ways that I'll outline. But there's a lot of things that flow on from this. We have crop and livestock damage. People might be forced from their homes, forced to migrate. There might be changes in livelihoods, changes in culture. We've heard from Inuit in Canada, we are people of the sea ice, and if there's no more sea ice, how do we be people of the sea ice? There's changes to communities, to culture, community breakdown, disruption to mental health systems and services. But even if we're not directly affected yet, even if we're witnessing or learning about these changes, even if we're trying to sit with these difficult conversations and wrestle with what this means for our personal future, our children's future, wrestling with inaction of leaders, this can have big impacts on us as well. Next slide. So what do we mean by mental health? I could give a whole presentation on that alone, but here we're talking about mental health and well-being documented impacts, including increased cases of suicidal thoughts and deaths by suicide, increased symptoms and new cases of diagnosable mental illness, increased susceptibility to physical ill health or even death for those with diagnosable pre-existing mental illness, and also worsened population mental health and emotional and mental distress. So I'm going to now look at the evidence for some of these direct and also through the continuum and pathways of influence, indirect impacts. And this is a very brief summary, but there's more evidence summarized in a briefing paper we can provide and in the work of many others. So we see with rising temperatures on both short and long timescales that there's worse mental health outcomes. This can vary across settings, but we see on average that a hotter day by about 1 degree Celsius raises the cases of death by suicide by about 1%. And this means, without climate action, that in the US and Mexico alone by 2050, 22,000 extra deaths by suicide would be attributable to climate change raising temperatures. We also see with heat waves that there's more frequent hospitalizations for psychiatric conditions, worse symptoms, and also people with pre-existing conditions are more physically affected by heat for a variety of reasons. And there's some estimates that even up to 2 to 3 times more likely to die in a heat wave. And we also see worse population mental health and well-being. I mean, many of us, if we've experienced heat waves, I'm from Adelaide, we have worse and worse heat waves with rising temperatures. People can't sleep, they're cranky. This has sort of flow-on effects. So we also know with extreme weather events, with the bushfires we're seeing, the floods we're seeing, the hurricanes we're seeing, the media often reports on the economic bill, how many homes were lost, and sadly, how many lives were lost. But what we don't often hear is that longer term impact on communities psychologically of how they're able to recover or settle or know that this might come again. And with any form of disaster, we see that the psychological toll, the number of people affected psychologically, can be up to 40 times greater than those physically injured. So this is a huge unaccounted for cost in how these disasters are going to affect communities. So we need timely support, both financial and practical support, to help people return their lives to normal as soon as possible and allow communities to come together. And we can even see in some cases that they form stronger bonds, and there's what's called post-traumatic growth. So not everyone will be affected, but there will be some people who have distress, understandably, that's longer term and ongoing. And we see increased diagnoses in PTSD, anxiety and depression, deaths by suicide, substance abuse. So we see these impacts around the world, and we see flow-on effects from these in ways that we saw across the continuum. But on the other sort of end of this continuum, even and when you're directly or even not directly affected, just being aware of these future threats, listening to talks like this has an impact on people emotionally and psychologically. We know from a survey of 10,000 young people around the world conducted by Caroline Hickman et al. That 56% now think humanity is doomed. Young people in particular, but we're all responding to the inaction of leaders, and that is understandably distressing. We feel very strong emotions, including grief, anxiety, guilt, and anger. And it's important we don't treat these responses in ourselves or in others as an illness. And there's new terms emerging like eco-anxiety, climate anxiety, ecological grief, solastalgia, and these are not new disorders, and they can even be healthy or adaptive responses to the threats that we're facing. And there's emerging evidence that for many, that having the appropriate support to process these emotions as part of a healthy response to the threat can help us cope with and respond to, lead into taking action, which itself seems to support well-being. So action can impact emotions, but our climate narratives impact action. But we have to understand how this is also an ongoing stressor, and how for many, and we saw that in the survey of 10,000 young people, that 45% of people aged 16 to 25 said that their sleep, their work, their relationships were being affected by this worry of what they are facing and being betrayed by those in positions of power. So this is trying to give a snapshot of the ways that climate change and mental health are linked. We know that certain groups are particularly affected across these effects that I outlined, including children and young people, the elderly, pregnant women, poorer communities, Indigenous communities, and those with pre-existing mental illness or distress. So you can see from who is most affected by the mental health impacts of climate change, that climate change itself threatens to widen inequalities, including inequalities in mental health. And inequality itself is a cause of emotional distress and worse mental health. Next slide. So these things all join together. Physical and mental health are also strongly linked. So when we see climate change as a health emergency, and all the ways we see increased infectious disease spread, lack of access to healthcare, food and water insecurity, this understandably also impacts our mental health. It's important that we look holistically and use systems thinking and make what are currently hidden costs and connections between these challenges tangible and clear to decision makers and communities, as this can enable action that works to prevent the negative impacts while providing opportunities to tackle multiple things together. But before we go into these opportunities for active hope, before we look more at this connection, we wanted you to hear how climate change is impacting people around the world in their own words. I know increasingly there are many such stories, but it's always important to acknowledge them and sit with them, to not just hear from me in the global north, but to hear from others around the world, to allow ourselves to feel the impacts of climate change, not only on an academic or data level, but to really open our hearts. So I encourage you to listen to these stories with me now.
When I think of climate change, there is a sense of dread that something awful is happening and not enough is being done about it. Because I feel like it's happening right before my eyes and we are not doing enough about it. So it makes me feel like the future is not guaranteed.
In my community, I've seen extreme heat and seasonal changes. We've been hit by many hurricanes and tropical storms as well. This past summer was an incredibly rainy season that caused extensive flooding throughout my city. I want policymakers and leaders to know what it's like to be a young person living in this world right now and how much weight has been put on our shoulders. We are told that we only have a decade to radically transform our society. I deeply long for a future where I can simply live in a world that actually cares about non-human nature and that is systemically just and equitable.
The world is significantly warmer, and I can feel it too. Going out these days seems so bothersome because the heat of the sun is not just the same. It's hot, yes, but painfully hot. The issue of climate change makes me feel sad, anxious, and angry all at the same time.
At times, climate change makes me feel overwhelmed. We had that huge, what we call black summer here in Australia, with the worst bushfires we've ever had. And that happened just before COVID. It feels like years ago, and it's somewhat of a distant memory for a lot of people now with everything going on, but it's something that I'll never forget.
Climate change makes me feel really overwhelmed. It breaks my heart, and that overwhelm also translates into anger about where my future would be in the next couple of years, where I think of how privilege and power often shields people from the impact of climate change.
Climate change and climate has a lot of influence on how we as human beings experience our life, be it the water we drink, the food we eat, the air we breathe. All of it has an impact. In the southern states of Telangana, Maharashtra, where agriculture has been impacted to a large extent, resulting in farmer suicides who are losing their livelihood because of lack of water. People have to explore how they feel about climate and its impacts and be vocal about what they think is hurting.
I have many emotions when thinking about climate change. Anything from despair, frustration, and impending doom. But I also feel hopeful that as a race, we can correct the course we are on. These feelings exacerbated themselves when I recently became pregnant. What kind of planet was I going to be leaving to my baby? What would the world be like in 10 years?
Everyone who shared their story with us. And obviously that's only the tip of the iceberg of stories to share. And we want to hear now your stories. So, we just heard a lot of data, a lot of evidence about some really hard things that our world is facing. We've heard a lot at COP so far as well. So we'd like you to reflect on how you're feeling right now. How we feel might change day to day, moment to moment, but it's important that we have some space to share that. So if you'd again go on to the Menti and type in the code that will come up on the screen, and just remember that how you're feeling is okay. It's not something that we're here to judge. It's here, those feelings are because you care about others, you care about the world, and it's what can help us, drive us into the action and the changes that we need to see, as we will soon talk about. So if you can share with us, how does the climate crisis make you feel? While people are doing that, maybe I can just share that for me, I mean, one of the reasons we started Climate Cares was, I was reading all these things, growing up in Adelaide, seeing the effect on the beloved bushland and landscapes around my own family's house, seeing the koalas, which their name actually means no drink. They're not even meant to really be drinking much water, but they were asking us for water on these hotter and hotter days. Watching the Great Barrier Reef die has been a huge source of grief. Seeing the impact on people around the world is sometimes overwhelming, and the anger that comes at inaction like the irrational inaction in the face of, it's so clear what we need to do. And seeing people dawdle, seeing inaction in the face of that can be infuriating for me. And we wanted to provide space to explore that and to see how we can both cope with and respond to what is going on. So we're seeing worried, scared, frustrated, overwhelmed, disappointed, committed, opportunity to make change, hopelessness, helpless, responsible, tiredness. And it's important that, you know, some days you may feel a whole mixture of these things. Some days you might feel a bit numb from it. Some days you might feel hopeful. Some days you might feel despair. So thank you so much for everyone being willing to share that with us. We invite you now to dig a little deeper. We know, again, this might be something that people are very comfortable with doing, or it might be something that feels a little bit uncomfortable, but just going through this process can be very helpful. So we'd encourage you to share and dig a little bit deeper into why you're feeling like that. So if we don't have time for that right now, we can also continue to share on the Menti while we move on. Can everyone see that? Great, okay, sorry, it's just coming back up again. It's a little technical blip. So I feel strong emotions because I care deeply about the issue. It is evidence of my empathy, but it is also truly painful. Thank you so much for sharing, whoever shared that, and hopeful as well we have. I feel this way because of inaction from government leaders. I'm at the start of my career in this area, and I'm inspired by the current push for relevant research and action towards a better future. It's the biggest issue affecting the globe. The mental health element is not part of mainstream discourse. We need action. The problem feels too big to solve. I feel a deep love for our planet. And a deep sense of inequality around the world. I feel overwhelmed by the complexity and size of the issue. It feels as though whatever we do as individuals will never be enough. The conversations that will change our future are being discussed behind closed doors, without the people who are on the front lines. I feel like this because I believe in the potential for humans to work effectively together. A hard part is being from a privileged country that is disproportionately guilty for the crisis, but will be affected least and last, and having terrible leadership. I feel somewhat hopeful that change will happen. Nobody talks about the grief and fear that comes with addressing this issue. Why aren't we talking more about the mental health toll? It's too big to think about as one thing, so my brain just doesn't know how to process. Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing this. There's, as you can see, more and more people sharing, and I guess it's just, you know, in the first instance, just recognizing that we're not alone in this. And there's, you know, possible to feel that deep love and that pain at the same time, to feel somewhat hopeless and somewhat hopeful. So encourage you to continue to share if that's helpful. And just to notice, you know, there might be conflicting emotions here, and to realize that, you know, all of these things are really understandable responses to the threats that we face. We'd like to move now into the second section, the hope for the future. So it's important to highlight that not only are we in this really difficult situation, but that despite that reality, and in fact, maybe even because of it, we do have the potential as humans to activate ourselves in the opposite direction. So not only is climate change a mental health emergency, but the way we respond to climate change, our mental health and our mindset affects how we can act as individuals, communities, and societies. The state of our mind and our mindset also impacts the state of our world. Our actions and the actions of other people are influenced by how we mentally and emotionally respond. So generating the individual and the system change we need requires an awareness of this, because we're going to need to work together in the long run. And then vitally, there are also unappreciated common causes to some of the burden of both mental health and a changing climate that arise from the way our societies currently operate. So for example, like the negative effects of air pollution, that has big physical and mental health impacts, but also is obviously heating up the planet. And if we recognize all these common causes, which we'll outline more in a minute, it also means there are common solutions. It means that there are key parallels between the world we need to create for a safe climate and that which fundamentally underpins and supports good mental health and emotional well-being. So there are many co-benefits or win-win opportunities here to transform our travel systems, our energy systems, our food, social, and healthcare systems, to change what we value, as Algo talked about, changing our value spectrum for multiple benefits. And there are examples of this everywhere. So one example is improving the energy efficiency of housing. We know if people are choosing between whether to heat their house or whether to eat, this financial strain has a huge mental health toll, as well as the cold having a mental health and physical health toll. If we reduce fuel poverty, that has big mental and physical health benefits, and it also improves the energy efficiency and takes less energy to heat. Similarly, if we have more active transport, if governments and communities provide more active walking and cycling facilities to connect people, and we reduce the reliance on cars, we're going to have improved benefits for our mental and physical health, as well as reduce the air pollution and the noise pollution. Well, the air pollution is leading to climate change. We see this also with enhanced provision of green and blue spaces. We know that fundamentally we're biophilic creatures. It means that we connect with nature. We are a part of nature and not apart from nature. And so that connection, that feeling connected to, can help reduce our stress and anxiety. But also having more tree cover in our cities, more biodiversity, also helps us cope with and reduce this urban heat island effect and cope with rising temperatures. We know that connected communities and working together is what we need to be able to cope with and respond to the changing climate future, and also is something that vitally underpins our health and well-being as humans. And we're seeing examples of this everywhere. We're seeing communities taking action. We're seeing councils taking action. There are great initiatives, great work being done that we can find, connect with, learn from, scale up. We won't have time to go through all of this now, but just to say that there's examples, we've just shown a snapshot here, but there's organizations that are councils in the UK that are working with GP surgeries to say if people are coming in getting sick from their cold houses, rather than just treat that symptom, let's prescribe them a new boiler. Let's change the efficiency of their housing while also improving their health. Let's have better cycling routes. Let's have better ways that we have our food systems. Let's have, as we'll hear from Jennifer Uchendu later, let's work with young people as she does with Sustu Vibes in Nigeria. And there's many, many examples of this around the world, and many Indigenous communities and communities experiencing the direct impacts who are already starting to make change on the ground, and where we can connect and really hopefully leverage their expertise in appropriate ways. So we're going to now look at what future we hope to see, what we can imagine and bring to life as creative, imaginative humans. So when we look at hope, we see that there are two, we're going to actually hear a video first about the hope that people around the world would like to see before we dive into the science behind hope.
In the future, I want people to relate to the environment as their home. Everyone wants their home tidy, clean, well-conditioned, and healthy, and they want them to treat the environment the same. I want people to realize that we literally get everything from our environment, and without it, we could also not exist.
The reduction or the complete elimination of fossil fuel. I want us to focus more on harvesting energy through sustainable means. I want to go outside and be able to breathe.
To be able to have access to safe drinking water, to think about building houses or work for companies that work with our environment and not against it, to be able to take a moment to stop, breathe in deep and think, wow, look at this. Just think about all those ideas out there. Listen to those people who have experience or have researched these areas, charities that have been working tirelessly to help the planet, and even people on the street to find out what would make a big difference to them. More support and funding for people making a difference, education about choices, and coming up with solutions that are working with nature. These need to be priorities, and positive media attention for countries and governments doing this seems like a win-win.
We need to embrace more local solutions and indigenous voices who have lived with nature for centuries, who have indigenous knowledge of what to do with climate adaptation. We need to be just with our climate decisions and our funding. We need to recognize the loss and damage that's happening to Black, Indians, and people of color all over the world.
I think most importantly, I really want to see leaders take action on climate change, and they really need to hold companies accountable who are responsible for majority of our global greenhouse gas emissions. I think without that final key step, we're not going to make enough progress.
Businesses getting serious about owning up the carbon addition that they do, commonly referred as carbon tax, and any innovations around how carbon tax is calculated, implemented across different geographies and countries across sectors, I would see that as a exciting place to be in.
I hope to see a global just transition as expressed by the Climate Justice Alliance and their allies, which would look like shifting to a regenerative economy, racial justice and social equity, environmental restoration, retainment and restoration of cultures and traditions, and more. I also hope for ecocide to be an international crime and for the world's tropical forests, oceans, and ecosystems to be protected. I want this for my future and for our collective future because I want to live in a world that is run by love, caring, sacredness, justice, and respect.
So thank you so much to everyone, again, who shared their stories with us, and for all of you who are sharing your stories with us here today. So we want to take a closer look at this word, hope. And I'm going to sort of lean heavily here on the work of other researchers, Maria Olaya, I'm sorry, I'm probably mispronouncing her name, and Joanna Macy and Chris Johnston from their book, Active Hope. So hope we can think about as, what are we hopeful for? Do we think that something will happen? Is it a likely outcome? Are we hopeful for that outcome? And this can be somewhat passive. We can see, and many people feel, and surveys are showing, what's the point of doing something if other people aren't acting? But what those surveys also show is that people underestimate how much other people care. People think that they care and do more than other people do. And this can be very demoralizing, but actually people do care much more than we often think. And the surveys show this. Obviously, there's not enough action by leaders, and there hasn't been to date, but we can sit passive in the face of this, or we can become active participants in pushing for those changes we hope to see. And this kind of hope is much more linked to, what do we hope for? What do we long for? One of the people sharing their stories in that video talked about, I long to see a world like this. What does that future look like that you really, really hope for? And how do we see that hope as a verb? How do we find the hope in our own action and the actions of others around us? How do we create hope rather than just wait for it to happen? So this kind of leads to these possible futures, where on the one hand, there's failing systems, doomed economy of industrial growth, and we see economic decline, resource depletion, climate change, inequalities. And it's understandable in the face of this, we're feeling fatalism, despair, anger, guilt, anxiety, and grief. On the other hand, there's an opportunity to work towards a future where there's multiple benefits together, where there's a life-sustaining society that looks like health for people as well as health for planet. And this is actually happening around the world. There's opportunities to see what this could look like. And this is much more to do with creating that hope, that agency, determination, and even that sort of broadest and maybe most powerful of human emotions of love. But obviously this is a sort of a false dichotomy. So we're not just standing with two possible futures. It's not all or nothing thinking. We're in a bad situation and there is much to be angry about. There is much to grieve. But at the same time, wherever we get, fatalism doesn't really make sense in that there's always a worse and a better path forward. We can always be nudging towards that better future we want to see. There's never a point where it's just appropriate to say, okay, this is it, we give up, because there is always a better path forward and a worse path forward from any point. And so it's holding that tension between both futures, knowing that both are appropriate. We can feel anxious about the future and feel hopeful that our actions and those of others will create change if we allow ourselves to see that hope as a verb. And we've found with the people that we work with, the communities who are doing this with Force of Nature, with other organizations we work with, that there's power in committing to this change in perspective. So we'd like to, again, turn back to you and hear from you and see what you would hope for. What would you like to create? Maybe with these multiple benefits of how we can create and take actions, or what we would like to see in creating a future that is a safer climate future and a healthier future. So if maybe there are things you're already working on, maybe there's things happening within your organization, maybe there's something you've heard about at COP. Maybe there's something you would like to see and you don't know that it's happening, but someone else can point to you that there is an example of this to look to scale up, to work with. So again, please go to menti.com and use the code 76351028. Community, activists, an opportunity for clean air, youth. Where do you currently find hope? Nature, green space, taking action myself, dinner table conversation, in my Friends Who Care, Force of Nature, which if anyone doesn't know is an amazing youth-led organization. Honesty, being honest and authentic about where we are, where we want to go, starting to have these discussions. It's sort of maybe a different way of thinking and talking about these problems. I mean, I come from a physics neuroscience background. It's different for me too, but we see that as humans, we make decisions not just on the facts. We've seen that. We don't make decisions just based on the data. We make them based on what we value, who we value, how we feel in response. Friends, in my Friends Who Care, family, Indigenous people's action, cold water swimming, diverse voices. Amazing, thank you so much. You can just see it growing and growing. There's so many things now I can barely read them. They're becoming too small on the screen. So taking my own action, showing grief. Thank you so much again to everyone who's sharing. So again, please feel free to continue to doing that. But I'm going to now, and with great pleasure, welcome some of our panelists so we can delve more and hear more diverse perspectives on these issues. So I'd like to invite Dr. Lisa Page and Jennifer Uchendu to the stage physically, and we also have panelists joining virtually. And so I will hand over to Professor David Nabarro, who will chair the panel discussion and introduce our wonderful panelists.
Well, first of all, I think we'd all really want to appreciate what you've just done, Emma. That was a beautiful presentation, and for me, really very inspiring. So as well as Lisa Page and Jennifer Uchendu, we're also joined by Gary Belkin and Fahmi Hanna remotely. Let me just give you brief biographical notes about them all. Lisa Page is consultant liaison psychiatrist and clinical senior lecturer with the Royal College of Psychiatrists in the UK, and she's on the stage right now. Jennifer Uchendu, Nigerian environmentalist and climate activist, and actually also somebody who I've really known for many years now and admire and enjoy working with. Lovely to see you, Jenny. She's founder of the youth activism organization Susty Vibes, and she's a researcher in eco-anxiety. Here, connected remotely, getting up early in the morning in New York City, is Dr. Gary Belkin, founder and president of the Billion Minds Institute. He's a public health guy, and he used to be in the New York City mayor's office, where he's been a deputy commissioner. And he's very interested in relationships between climate and environmental sustainability on the one hand, and social capital and civic action, emotional resilience on the other. Just the right guy to have here for this discussion. Thank you, Gary. And then also with us is Dr. Fahmi Hanna. Now, he's in the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse in the World Health Organization. You can see the WHO headquarters just behind him on the picture. Fahmi is also co-chair of a cross-United Nations reference group on mental health and psychosocial support in emergency settings. So these are our panelists, and I'm super honored to be able to chair this panel discussion. I've got some questions that have come in from the audience, and I'm going to actually pass them on to individual panelists. But if other panelists would like to comment, please just put your hand up so I can see you, and I can see you both in the live feed and remotely. So let me go to the first question. Here it is. Mental health is at an all-time low due to COVID and all the natural disasters underway. In fact, in terms of mental health, we face a global crisis. Our youth have been affected by the climate that has been left to them by older people. How can we change the tide? Now, it's an anonymous question, but I thought perhaps, Jenny, you could be the first, and then Lisa after you, and then Gary and Fahmi, if you wish to comment, but I've got another question for you coming in a minute. And Emma, please come in anytime you want. Let's go first of all to Jennifer.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Nabarro, and thank you all so much for having me. Such a privilege. That is a very big question. I wish I really had all the answers, but what I do know is this conversation, we talk about active hope. That's how we change the tide. It's now finding what does hope mean to you, because it's so contextual. What hope means to me in Nigeria is very different from someone in the UK. So it's really going back to the question of what hope means and how you can build active hope. And I remember my experience of eco-anxiety starting way before COVID, and then COVID coming, and it just became really, really complex because you're having to deal with so much at the same time. There's hope in community, as Emma has mentioned. So really creating and finding spaces where you can speak about how you're feeling. A lot of times we hold all of these emotions. We begin to change the tide where we express ourselves as much as possible. From the research I've done, the work I've done with young people, just having space to do things with, different people, like-minded people would help you. So whether it's with COVID or with the climate crisis, we really need to express ourselves and have that community where we can find hope in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. And call me David, please, everybody. Sounds better, and it's what I feel good about. And lovely to hear your words. I'm not going to waste time by talking too much in between. Let me go straight to Lisa Page. How do you react to that first question, please, Lisa?
Thank you, David, and thank you for having me here today. I suppose I come at that question from the viewpoint of a health professional, a doctor, and there's a few things there's a lot in there. So the first thing I would say is, yes, absolutely, we know that as natural events happen more and more, be that floods, heat events, storms, as Emma's articulated, there will undoubtedly be mental health impacts of that. And some of those are significant. And we know that because we've got good evidence of that. And pretty much, of course, it follows that anyone who's caught up in that sort of event will, at the very least, be distressed. They'll have a lot of practical issues to sort out in the days and weeks that follow such an event. But I think we also need to remember that people are, for many people, there is resilience that they're able to demonstrate in these times of adversity. We did actually see that a little bit through COVID as well. So we mustn't forget, I think, that humans are resilient. They're resilient in their mental health as well. But inevitably, that's not the case, across the board. And depending on individual circumstances, people will suffer very significantly after these events. But we need to do things that support resilience, that promote it, and we need to have good systems for both preventing and managing mental health problems when they crop up. And we know a lot about how to do that. It's the deployment of it and the implementation of it. COVID, I think, is still a story being written, and we don't yet know quite what the mental health impacts of COVID are going to be, and we probably won't know for some time. But I think I would say, I think it does, and I think the question also taps in, doesn't it, to the distress that people are feeling, and that Emma and Jennifer have articulated about fear for the future and how to balance the fear and the hope. And I think the first thing I'd like to say as a psychiatrist, I suppose, is that these are realistic fears. These are understandable fears. I think people are right to be concerned, and I wouldn't want to pathologize that from the off. So rather than thinking about treatment for those fears or that distress, I'd like to think about responding as a health community to that and taking action.
Thank you, Lisa. Just so pleased, and we're going to hear from Fahmi and Gary on this first question. First of all, Fahmi, please, from the World Health Organization.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to join you all today. I think we can change the tide if we raise awareness and if we invest in mental health finances and human resources. Raising awareness starting from events like this one. It's COP26. There have been 25 conferences of COP before this one that did not include a panel like this on mental health. We need to make sure that this is not the last one that include a mental health panel. The link between mental health and climate change need to be seen. It's evidence-based, and mental health need to be treated as a cross-cutting subject when we address the climate. Second, we need to invest in mental health because there is a return on investment when we invest in mental health. Based on a recent study that WHO done a few years back with the World Bank, there is a return of $3 for every $1 invested on management of depression and anxiety through improved outcome of productivity of the population. But unfortunately, governments are not spending enough on mental health. Mental health spending represent only 2% of the general healthcare budget. So we need to invest and we need to raise awareness.
Thank you, Fahmi. To Gary, please, from New York.
Yeah, and I want to join with my fellow panelists. Just really privileged to be here. And Emma, you were fantastic. You know, as a psychiatrist as well, I think the mental health profession really has to grasp its importance to this moment in human civilization and to finally dismantle this falsity that we've set up that mental illness is about individuals and not about society. And to put more of a spotlight on the social. And you know, your opening quote, Emma, about you know, this poignant chapter in our history, it's that we might strive for well-being as a norm, is more than a poignancy, it's a necessity. If we don't figure out how to have a renaissance of nurturing as the core purpose of society, there is no way we're going to have a renaissance of nurturing the earth as a core purpose of society. How we treat each other is mirrored in how we treat the earth and vice versa. And we mental health professionals know a lot about how to build in the structures and attitudes and commitments and communities that nurture. And we've been silent in that conversation. We think it's a political one, but it's our conversation. And we have to be obnoxiously ambitious about asserting that time is up. We need to create vigilant attention and focus and resource on building nurturing societies if we have a chance at building and maintaining you know, a nurturing earth. When power communicates north to south, as it has for centuries, that we can't help you, that we won't help you, that it's not worth it to us to help you, and that now youth in the north feel their governments doing that to them too, messaging that to them too. It immobilizes all of us to do hard things, to do democratic things, to do mutual things, to do nurturing things. And we have to change that. And mental health folks have a lot to contribute to changing that.
Gary, thank you. And Emma, would you like to make any comment on this first round at this point?
Yeah, thank you so much, David. I just, you know, it's so nice to just listen to my fellow panelists. I'm just sort of sitting here nodding to everything that's being said. And it's just a pleasure, as Fahmi said as well, to have the opportunity to have this within the space of COP. I guess to bring back to the question around this sort of COVID climate, what we can learn from COVID and move into climate as well. I think, you know, fundamentally COVID showed that, you know, viruses don't respect national borders. Greenhouse gas emissions don't respect national borders. We're a connected world, but also we saw what happens when we disconnect in COVID, when we're shut in our houses, and the impact of that on us all. And so what we need to do, as Gary said, is sort of fundamentally shift, you know, what is the, you know, he said this beautiful phrase, a renaissance of nurturing. And that might sound something a bit left field, but actually sort of all of the evidence is that this is what we need for mental health, for the underpinnings of good mental health prevention and support in communities, but also what we need to work towards as a planet, as a species that would protect our planet and us in a safer climate future. And so I think that we can learn a lot from how we've been disconnected, but how we can reconnect and to see the importance of that to each other and to our broader world.
Thank you, Emma. So active hope came from Jenny. Being able to work with fear and hope together as a way of working came from Lisa. The important roles of mental health professions in ensuring this happens and the cost effectiveness of investing there. The need for ambitious, indeed obnoxious ambition to encourage nurturing societies and learn from COVID. You can't do any of this without connecting. Super important messages. Let's go to the next ones. What work is being done formally to measure and record the mental health impacts of climate change? Are any validated scales being developed? Let me start with Fahmi, then go to Emma. and then quick comments from others. Let's try to see if we can do quickly on this one to go through to a third one. So Fahmi, please.
Thank you so much, David. WHO is strengthening its evidence, existing evidence on climate change and mental health. And we have worked during the last year on a specific policy brief for policymakers and stakeholders on linking mental health and climate change that we plan to launch by early next year through a collaboration between my department, the Department of Mental Health, and the Department of Environmental Health. But in general, the work of mental health monitoring has been agreed by the member states of WHO. This year at the World Health Assembly, the member states have discussed mental health in link to public health emergencies and have approved a set of indicators for the extended mental health action plan between 2013 until 2030. They agreed on its extension instead of ending in 2020 until 2030 with a new set of indicators. But what happened in mental health in general would have, and of course, its impacts on the links between mental health and the climate change.
Yeah.
But when we measured the baseline for countries responded to this very efficiently. We had responses from more than 80% of the member states of WHO. More than 170 countries sent us data for the baseline. But unfortunately, when we have deep dives in the data, the news we see are not really great news. Only 2% of the government's general health budget is spent on mental health. This led to a huge gap in mental health human resource. For example, while 1 in 10 would have mental health needs in low-income countries, there is only 1 mental health worker for every 50,000. Only 25% of countries around the world have a functioning system of mental health integrated into primary health care. We are aware that with changing climate, we'll have more hazardous events and natural emergencies. So when we ask at countries, is your disaster preparedness plan including a mental health and psychosocial component? Unfortunately, 54 countries only reported having a functional system of mental health and psychosocial support preparedness. And also, when we ask about service coverage, as rightly reported by Emma, there will be either exacerbation of existing stress and condition or new conditions emerging, such as depression. When we ask at countries to measure the baseline of depression, we find that only 40% of people with depression would receive any type of care, leaving more than 60% of people without service coverage. This mechanism for monitoring indicator will be monitored every 2 years through the Mental Health Atlas, and WHO will continue to monitor that. We also launched a command framework as part of our work within the Interagency Standing Committee, including a unified data collection system that happy to share after this meeting the link for this resource. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Fahmi. And everybody, this interagency standing committee that Fahmi is chairing is really important because it enables looking right across countries. It's really great work, new work, but great work. Let's go just in order to Emma next and then to Gary. Emma, please.
Fantastic to hear from Fahmi, these initiatives to try to understand a baseline for what's going on. But we can see that it's already a very troubling picture in mental health in general, and he outlined these sort of massive treatment gaps. And so we need a revolution in mental health care in general. And then when you factor into that the sort of changing climate, it's how do we respond to meet those needs? How do we create that preparedness? And this is where I think Gary will speak much more to. So I'll leave for him to say the way we can start to mobilize communities and really change the sort of way that we think about mental health prevention and treatment. But we're already seeing in the UK, for example, the NHS investing a lot in green social prescribing initiatives to connect people more with nature. But that in itself is sort of a climate action as well. If people are spending time in spaces where they're able to, that could link into action. We could easily link that into action. So there's ways to connect, again, here, these kind of multiple benefits. But in terms of measuring, I want to just reiterate that these impacts of climate change on mental health I outlined are currently hidden costs. They're not being taken into account by policymakers when they calculate the cost of climate inaction. And these benefits of climate action for mental health, for physical health, are also unaccounted for. So we need to make them tangible. These are complex pathways, and so it's easy for them to be hidden, but we need to make them tangible. And to do that, we need to start to measure and quantify. And this is a big, big gap. So there is not enough research. There's not enough support. You know, all researchers say we need more research, but this is truly a big gap. And so we're starting to see now more studies coming out, starting to look at how people are feeling in response to the climate crisis. And I referred earlier to the survey of 10,000 young people. We've done work surveying young people in the UK. We're finding higher rates of distress around climate than COVID in youth, even in the UK in the middle of the pandemic. So we're starting to measure these things, but there's a long way to go and there's a lot more work to be done. And I'd call to funders, to people, you know, working in mental health and climate change. This is a key gap. And I'd love to send out our briefing paper that outlines that more. But yeah, we're trying to bring people together to across disciplines to start to really make concrete what have currently been hidden costs and hidden links. And again, turn this from this vicious, unaccounted for cycle of impacts into a virtuous cycle of benefits.
Thank you very much. And let's go to Gary now, Emma, and thanks for teeing Gary up. Here you go, Gary.
Yes, so Emma knows me too well. So, you know, I noticed when the words appeared at the end on that slide, Emma, when you asked everyone what they hope for, where they find hope. The most frequent word, if that's how word size was matched, was community. And you know, again, there's a mirroring here of how we're talking about mental social health and how we're talking about earth health. The earth conversation has been a lot about infrastructure, energy grids, et cetera. But there's a social climate that we also have to nurture and worry about. And the mental health system has paid a lot of attention to the sort of issues Fahmi rightly mentions and we need to invest in. But we also have to focus outside of the mental health infrastructures as the be and end all, and see our mental health system as something that supports community to be a place that is an engine for mental health and well-being. The focus is not our system. The focus has to be our communities, both for earth action and for social action and for well-being action. And we have to build their capacity. I did this when I was New York City Mental Health Commissioner, borrowing heavily from learning from the Global South about how most of the skills for mental health, prevention, promotion, social tie building, collective efficacy can be done by people, assisted by folks like mental health systems and other supports, but by people. And we have to make that the driving energy, not from people driving them into systems, but from having systems step up and empower and enable and support people to do the problem solving. That's our way through the climate crisis. That's our way through the associated socio-emotional well-being nurturing crisis.
Thank you. Thanks for it's really emphasizing that people are the solution and that needs to be at the center of our minds. And there's another question. It's not the most immediate question on my list, but I can just see it here. It's as follows, it may be relevant. How can we transform the evidence of the links between climate change and mental health into community and political action? Gary, you started us in that direction. Let me go, if I may, to Jennifer. And could you also pick up on Gary's point about his learning from what he says communities in the south of the world as to what the societal climate is all about. So Jenny, your moment, please.
Thank you very much. And yes, Gary was already, pointing to the right direction in terms of having a community-centric approach in managing or dealing with the intersects with mental health and climate crisis. I think for me, from my experience in Nigeria, when we started feeling, the young people I was working with started feeling, really overwhelmed and anxious, we decided to just have an event or a space to talk about it. And then we started to ask ourselves questions, reflecting what's really going on. Do we feel this? Is this subjective? I guess when it was established that this was a problem, we now started to seek answers, research, who do we need to talk to? And then in speaking to our government, our leaders and whatnot, we try to also pass this emotion. So we don't just talk about the climate crisis as something that is happening to the environment and it's not impacting us, just showing that personal link in having conversations with stakeholders. I think it's really important. And now that, there's now sort of like a trend of eco-anxiety being talked about a lot, we really need to point the policymakers to the research. They need to see that this is ongoing. This is how a lot of people are thinking about this situation. A few days ago at COP, I was speaking to, people at the UNDP, and I said to them, have you read, this 10,000 survey of people all over the world saying that government inaction is pushing them to anger? Are you even considering the other linkages with these emotions? For us in Nigeria, I've seen that anger coming from youth can be really destructive. It can lead to violence. It's a real big issue that has, like, if you don't deal with, if you don't tackle, then you have other things to sort of manage at the same, then it becomes even more expensive. So it's really pointing them to the research, looking at a community-centric approach to sort out the problem, but really looking at strengthening what already exists. And of course, for many parts of the global south, we don't already have very strong, public health institutions. So we need to go back to the drawing board in the sense that climate-aware support needs to be brought out to the fore, and then supporting and educating as many of our health workers would be really beneficial. So those are some of the ways that I can immediately think in terms of the way forward to go from a community-centered approach.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Did anyone else on the panel want to comment on turning work on the links between climate change and mental health into political and community action? Please just, if you're sitting on the physically in Glasgow, please just come in.
I'd like to say one point, which is I think it's when you're working in this area and, sitting here listening to Emma's presentation, it might seem quite obvious and inevitable to us that there are links between climate change and mental health, but I don't think that is true for policymakers necessarily. And I think there's a job to be done. Events like today, events at COP, groups like ourselves being present at COP to reiterate this message, to emphasize it, to describe it and outline it, and join the dots essentially, so that we make it obvious for policymakers, because I think otherwise the point gets missed. So I think there's still a lot of work to be done there, just making this message apparent and obvious.
Thank you, Lisa. Very, very important. And Fahmi, we'll get you to comment. And Gary, if you want to tell us a little bit about how you're working on this politically in New York and more widely, please don't hesitate to give us some tips. Fahmi first, please.
Thank you so much, David. Within the humanitarian systems, the field of mental health and psychosocial support is recognized as a cross-cutting topic, means that it recognized formally as a topic which is not relevant only to one sector, which is health or protection or education or camp management or nutrition. In fact, it is recognized as a cross-cutting topic with activities and services in all those sectors. I think I would like to echo what Gary has mentioned rightly about the multi-sectorality of the area of mental health and psychosocial support, and that also need to be reflected when we address mental health links with climate change, because it's not the function of one sector, and really take a whole of society approach. And a good model for that can come from humanitarian system.
Really great, everybody. This is a remarkable thing that Fahmi is referring to. Multiple organizations working together and actually trying to express this issue in practice, the importance of societal action. Gary, please, some tips for those who really want to do what you've been doing, I believe, very effectively in New York?
Yeah, so a little more specifically, what we did was create opportunities for what's been called task sharing, which is where community settings of all sorts, job training programs, homeless shelters, daycare centers, schools, are equipped with skills and opportunities to act on mental health issues and opportunities to build mental health promoting spaces, often in partnership with mental health clinicians. But in this case, the clinicians are the coaches and capacity building partners to those other places. And so that is a model that, again, as I said, we shamelessly stole from the Global South. I learned it there working in Sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world. It's a deep evidence base. And that kind of approach is really a way to get much more deeper and upstream. I put in the chat a paper that just shows a wealth of what we know can be done in multiple settings through task shared approaches to really bring us to the sort of well-being and nurturing purposes that we say we want to get to. The roadmap is there. We need to seize it.
Thanks, Gary, very much indeed. Really grateful to you for picking that up and going very specific. Now, our panel is going to have one final question. We've got about 2 minutes left. Here's the question, and I'm going to ask in the following order: Jenny, Lisa, Fahmi, Gary, and Emma to complete a sentence. The sentence is as follows. Following this session, I would like to see ... So each panelist, what would you like to see most of all following this session? And I'd just like to add, if you can, explain how you're going to make sure that it happens. Jenny first, please.
Such a I mean, I would like to see a lot of things, but definitely increased commitment and investment into conversations and projects like this. It's about time. And I think it was Fahmi that mentioned we don't want to have another COP where conversations like this are not brought to the fore. So definitely more and more commitments and investment towards supporting mental health and its linkages with the climate crisis. Yeah.
And Jenny, we could add, it really is worth it for using Fahmi's statistics. Thank you, Jenny. Let's go to Lisa. What would you like to see following this session?
I'd like to see health as a central consideration in any negotiation, any decision-making that's made in COP. And within that, I'd like to see mental health foregrounded because it's absolutely, if not as important, it may even be more important than other health considerations. So let's see it in there as a primary driver of what we're trying to achieve at COP.
Thank you very, very much. Fahmi, please, would you like to tell us what you'd like to see after this session?
Thank you so much, David. I'd like to see mental health and psychosocial support as a key topic discussed at high level by all policymakers in COP27.
That's very clear. Right on. Gary, please.
I would echo exactly that. I mean, we have these huge organizational infrastructures, the IPCC, the COP process, the conventions, this whole global process to think about the Earth's climate. We need a similar infrastructure, integrity, high level attention, and mass thought and action on the social climate, because we will remain stuck on the Earth's climate if we're not as aggressive about nurturing the social climate.
I must say, you've been using these words. I like obnoxious and then aggressive ambition. There's something in that, Gary.
I want to see more righteous anger out there as well, by our community, by the mental health community.
Thank you, Gary. Emma, please. What would you like to see after this session?
See people going out and talking about this in their own organizations and communities and joining networks and creating networks to come together to share learning and resources. We're going to share the resources from today. There's many organizations out there doing wonderful work, starting to create this social climate, as Gary calls it, or implementing mental health and psychosocial support of all colours on the ground around the world in the face of the climate crisis, allowing us to both cope with and respond to. And so I see an opportunity to bring that network together. And I just want to take a moment, I know I'm going a little bit off piece, but just to reflect on that previous question, that it's been so exciting to see in the sort of glimmer of hope in the midst of COP that people are starting to use the phrases of around like how they're feeling even as leaders and the emotions that they hold even as decision makers to lead us into action. So it's not only, you know, as decision makers, they're too, you know, guided by their emotions and their values in the decisions they make. So it's not only understanding how young people are feeling or how we're feeling, but what are those people in positions of power? How do we get them to tap into those values and experiences? Climate change obviously requires technical solutions. It requires climate finance. It requires all of these things, but it's not just a technical issue, it's a social issue. And so, yeah, I'd really like to see that duality, you know, or not even created as a duality, but brought together to see it as a unified, you know, social challenge alongside the sort of technical challenge, or embedded within the technical challenge, how we bring that to fruition and create this more hopeful, positive vision of the future. So thank you so much, David. I'll hand back to you.
Thank you. So technical, social and emotional issue only to be addressed by connecting with people's hearts and their souls. Very important points made by all of our panelists at the end there. And so it gives me a chance now to share with you some of my key messages that you might like to take away with you, not so much as we close. We're not closing. This is part of an ongoing conversation, everybody. And it's a conversation that really needs to happen. As you will have gathered from our panelists, it's a conversation that's overdue because, first point, climate change is an unappreciated mental health emergency. And so it's really important that the hidden connections between climate change and mental health are made more tangible and more concrete in ways that touch people's hearts as well as their brains, so that they can better measure and appreciate the glowing impacts globally. For example, as we heard with the Mental Health Atlas, the recent agreement by the World Health Assembly to have a new set of indicators, and the experience that we've heard from New York. It's really important that all of us not just raise awareness, but make sure that that awareness leads to a recognition that you can act and get good results. But remember, second point, it is absolutely normal and a sign of our humanity that we feel a range of emotions in response to the climate crisis. Allow ourselves to be both sad and hopeful. Allow ourselves to be curious about how others are feeling, to connect with others, being ready to open our hearts and to use the emotional energy to drive meaningful action. Because there's lots to grieve and to be angry about, but there's so many causes for hope and for optimism, as you've heard. So working with hope and fear together, that's how we can create enormous energy and bring real benefits to people everywhere. And so that brings me to my third point. There are so many opportunities for tackling climate change and also encouraging more mental resilience and better mental health at the same time. Co-benefits of climate action. We've heard specifics, green spaces, energy efficient homes, community groups, and all the solidarity that we often see, especially in many communities that are sometimes labeled as low income societies. Successful approaches must be scaled up and replicated. But remember, it means investment and commitment in people as the agents of change, and a recognition from leaders that this is worth investing in because there's such a good return on investment. And now to my last point. A key action to take going forward is to build connections, but to do it with ambition, to do it fearlessly, to do it with love. Build connections across borders, across sectors, across disciplines, link with people we wouldn't normally talk to. Because if we don't talk to them, how are they going to understand what we're actually offering them as a brilliant way forward? Because what we're trying to do is to nurture communities of people who are equipped to cope with and respond to climate change, building capacity and infrastructure, but within societies everywhere, supporting people so they become the solutions of the problems, so they then stand in their power and achieve extraordinary results. And it matters for everybody to be involved, especially those who are often left behind. Connected communities support mental health and well-being while sharing learning, finding new resources and creating resilience. And we can all do this, finding opportunities to share. And why not let's all of us apply it after today? We've learned so much, we've appreciated so much, and we've had a wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you all, Jennifer, Lisa, Fami, and Gary, and thank you, Emma. Back to you.
Thank you so much, David. So I think we're going to now move to our final activity to wrap up the session, to allow you to do what we just did, really, and think about what you would like to see, what you would like to do going forward. So we're just going to get that final Mentimeter activity up on the screen. And David, I'll hand to you to speak through this activity and enable people to talk about what they would like to do going forward.
Well, that's a real honor, Emma. Thank you. Everybody, first of all, I'm sorry, some people say there's a bit of an echo. And so let's try to mute our mics if we've got them open, if we're not speaking. Now, everybody, you heard the messages. I summarized them, I think, reasonably faithfully from the discussion. And you've got them. And what I want to explore with you now is how we can all channel these insights into triggering change in ourselves, in the organizations we work with, in the societies and communities in which we play a part. Everyone has a unique role to play in shaping our collective future. So how are we going to make these connections? Here's my first question. How will you honor your feelings about climate change and look after yourself in the process? Will you open your heart and let emotions in, even if they feel scary or overwhelming at first? Will you be challenging and courageous enough to lead with an open heart that acknowledges the experiences of others? Will you be comfortable with the fact that your own feelings vary day to day? And will you speak to people directly about their experiences of climate change? Let's see what you've got to say. And let's read some of the responses, which I will try to spotlight on my screen so I can read. No, I can't do it. Oh, here we are. Well, there are all sorts of things coming in here. And all I want to say to you is you can probably read them in Glasgow easier than I can read them on my screen. But it's about connecting. It's about talking. It's about finding communities. It's about looking for opportunities. It's about respecting each other. It's about being ready to hug nature and hug each other. It's about actually being active and doing things and making a contribution. So thank you very much. What lovely things. Being honest about our feelings, that really matters too. Keep fighting the good fight is one comment. Keep talking about it with others. Thank you. Now I come to the second question. What are you going to do differently as a result of experiencing this session? Think about the radical actions that you can do. Get writing now, quickly, because we're running out of time. but think about the radical actions you can do in your own community, in your workplace, or coming into any aspect of your social relations, but with this focus on the new perspective of connecting curiously, ambitiously, sometimes even outrageously, because that's how you can touch the hearts of others. Can you actually make a habit of showing up with a more open heart? Can you make a habit of subscribing to a narrative that's more positive about the future? Can you make a habit of trying to connect with the emotions of others and put those first? So here we have some examples. Be okay with feeling anxious and hopeful at the same time. If that's a conclusion coming out of this event, I am so happy, because paradox is life. Continue to practice radical empathy. Great, great. And then bring the conversation of active hope to all my work. That was Jenny's point. Thank you very much indeed. Talking about mental health, bringing positivity to my community. Absolutely. Speak out more often, right on, and speak out from your principles and what you believe. Start each question by asking others how they feel. Nice one. Talking to people who I wouldn't normally talk to. Even better, that's the secret of making connection work. Well, everybody, as you can see, I'm super excited. I want to thank you all for everything you've done. And Pip, thank you for your help. Emma, again, thank you for your massive creativity. And what I'd love you to do, Emma, as we close, is to explain how we're going to share these resources with everybody and how they can stay in touch. Back to Emma Lawrence, Dr. Emma Lawrence, and real appreciation again to everybody who made this last bit so much fun.
Thank you so much, Professor David Nabarro, and to all our amazing panelists, to the Climate Cares team who've been working very hard to bring this session, to the Resilience Hub, but most of all to everyone who's joined us today, both in Glasgow and around the world. It's been a real thrill to see all of these comments and stories come in and know that there is a huge network of people out there who care about this, who are starting these conversations, and to take that back into their organizations. And yeah, to continue this as really just a start of a discussion. So we're going to share resources. Again, we've drawn on not only our own research and work, but that of many others working in this space. So we will share all of the resources through the Eventbrite sign-up links. You'll receive those. We would love to hear from you. And we just thank you so much again for joining us. And if you've got time as you leave, we'll just filter through the slides that will have some things on there to show you that will be coming your way to sort of entice you with some resources. But yeah, there'll be more to come, so stay tuned. Thank you, David. Thank you, panelists. Thank you,
Pleasure.
audience. And
Fami and Gary and Lisa and Jenny, special thanks to you.